Well, we're ready for lesson 18, so let's open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for another new day that you've given us. We ask, Father, that you would strengthen us and help us to do in this day what you would have us to do, and more importantly, that we would be in this day what you would have us to be. Father, remind us, draw our hearts to you, remind us of your character and the character of Christ, and may we reflect that character more and more to people around us. We pray for people that are needy, that need our help. Give us wisdom. Give us eyes to see how best to meet those needs. Father, we pray for the ladies that are not able to be here today for various reasons. And we just pray that you would encourage them at home, that you would make your presence real to them, that they would be aware that your hand is upon them even there. And we just ask that you would bless us who have gathered here to be around your word this morning. Open our hearts and just give us a fresh awareness of who you are and what you are to us. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, we'll start with a timeline, and we'll kind of follow along the notes there. So Jonah is number 2 on the timeline. And so you can write his name, on, if you haven't done so already, on blank number 2. Oh yeah.
What is the date for
The
that?
date is 760, roughly. So as you can see, he's contemporary with Amos. And speaking of Amos, I wanted to make a comment. I think it was a couple weeks ago when we were talking about what's the main point, and we were talking about Amos, and you said, doesn't he show mercy or talk about mercy, give hope, you know? And at first I said no, because I was thinking, I was focusing on just the main message, and that Hosea, you know, his children's names would be changed. But Amos does have a message of hope. In the very last chapter, after he talked about the total destruction, he talks about the total restoration at the end. So yes, and I think really isn't that characteristic of God, that God gives warnings, he definitely judges sin, and yet he always has a message of hope. There's always that extension to his people. If you repent, you know, I am going to bring a remnant to myself. So yes, there is hope in Amos. I think maybe the only one that there wasn't any hope for was Obadiah. I was looking through that for the Edomites. It's like, okay, you have crossed the boundary, and now the only thing remaining for you is judgment. But most of the others do have those. You just see the longing heart of God. I don't want to destroy you. I want to be able to bless you. I want you to repent. So, okay, just wanted to clarify that. All right, so Jonah's number 2, the date is 760. But if you look at the notes, while Amos and Obadiah were preaching at the same time in Israel, they had completely different audiences. I mean, they were addressing totally different groups of people. Amos spoke to his fellow Israelites to warn them. But God sent Jonah to Israel's strong enemy, the Assyrians, Nineveh. And so you need the new map, because Nineveh was way out of the boundaries of the original map. So the new map has the entire Fertile Crescent here. So the first thing I want you to do is find Nineveh and circle it over there. And then somewhere around Nineveh, draw one of those little talking heads and label it Judah. So not a whole stick man, but just the head that's speaking.
Jonah.
Oh, yeah, Jonah. What did I say? Judah?
Judah.
Yeah, Jonah. Because Nineveh, if it wasn't the capital, it certainly was a very large and important city there. Okay, so let's go down then to the second paragraph in the notes. says differences between Jonah and Amos. Well, because the two men were speaking to two different groups of people, they had different messages to share. Amos was warning his very complacent, self-satisfied countrymen not to gloat over what was coming to their enemies, because judgment was going to fall on them too if they didn't repent. So he says, don't think you're going to escape just because you're Israel, But Jonah was sent directly to one set of those enemies to warn them that God's wrath would fall on them in just 40 days if they didn't repent of their evil, vicious ways. They were a very vicious, conquering army, Another thing that was different was the result of the two prophets preaching, vastly different. Sadly, the Israelites ignored, for the most part, they ignored Amos's warning and prediction, and that judgment did come just 40 years after he started preaching. But Jonah's prophecy that God would overthrow Nineveh in just 40 days, that never happened. But it never happened for a very good reason, because they did repent. Even the king tore his clothes, sat with ashes on him to show his repentance and humility. And God saw that, and so he didn't send the judgment. So, very different results of their preaching. But I think there's something important. I really think that God sent Jonah to Nineveh as much for Jonah's sake as for Nineveh's sake, because he had something important he wanted to teach him about compassion. Because see, Jonah knew doctrine. He knew what God was like. He even says, when he's sitting there, he preaches what God told him to preach, and then he sits outside the city waiting to see what's going to happen, just waiting for the fire and brimstone to fall. It doesn't happen, and he's pouting. He's mad. He's just flat out mad, And God comes to talk to him about that. He says, I know you're a gracious God. You're long-suffering. You're slow to anger, and you have great mercy. He knows a lot of truth about God. And he was happy when those things were shown to him, when he was in the belly of the fish, dying, and he's calling out to God and repenting, and God rescued him. And he was happy about that. But he's not happy when God shows that same compassion for the enemies, And God says, shouldn't I have compassion on this city? Look, there's all these thousands of people that don't know their right hand from their left, meaning they have no moral sense. They don't know any better in one sense, Shouldn't I have compassion on them if they repent? So this is a life lesson that Jonah needs to learn. And again, this is a contrast to Amos. See, when God gave Amos an assignment, even though he was not a prophet at all, in fact, some of the priests or some of the king's men were saying, who are you to talk to us, Amos? You're not a prophet. And he says, I was no prophet. I'm not a prophet's son. I was a herdsman. I was a shepherd, this low-class person. But the Lord took me from following the flock, and he said to me, go prophesy to my people Israel. Now therefore, hear the word of the Lord. It's like he's saying, God told me to speak, so listen up, people. I've got a message. No hesitation at all. He obeyed. Whereas Jonah, remember Jonah tried to go to a place called Tarshish? Do you know where Tarshish was? We don't know exactly, but it was somewhere on the western coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Well, you circled Nineveh. How does Tarshish relate to Nineveh?
East and west.
East and west. And, Nineveh was way over there, not just a little distance, and Tarshish was sort of considered the ends of the earth, the ends of the known world, So Jonah was trying to go as far away as he could get. In fact, it says he was fleeing the presence of the Lord. Good luck with that. made me think of that psalm that says, where can I go from your spirit? If I ascend into heaven, you're there. If I go down to the depths, you're there. You know, no matter where I go, your spirit is everywhere, and you are everywhere. So no, Jonah was not able to get away from God, but that was his initial reaction. You want me to go here? I'm going to go exactly the opposite direction. I'm not going to do that. And of course, he did repent. But he needed, we look at the very last line of the Jonah notes, he, like all of us who call ourselves believers, needed to grow in grace as well as godliness. He needed more than doctrine. Doctrine is never enough. We need to apply it, and we need to love God because of who he is and what he is. Okay, and then the other thing, I have I have a whole page worth of notes, this time from Bible Study Fellowship. And so I just wanted to kind of go through and share some of those things with you as well. And the first one, I didn't know exactly how to word this. A guilt trigger are words. Do you ever have times when your own words come back to haunt you? Well, that happened to Judah. As Tamar, you know, when Judah finds out that Tamar's pregnant, he's stone her, you know, kill her, you know. And as she's being brought out to die, she sends a message to Judah, and she says, see if you can recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. See if you can recognize it. Those words are almost exactly what the 10 brothers said to their dad when they brought the torn robe dipped in blood and said, see if you can recognize whose robe this is. And I think even the wording triggered that memory and just the guilt that Judah has had all these years. And I think that's why he had repentance. He changed. You know, he didn't deny, and he was no longer judgmental. He allowed her to live and to carry his son, actually his twin sons. And so, like David did when Nathan the prophet came to him and said, you are the man, you know, and David instantly repented. And Judah was quick to change. But I think it was his words that triggered that memory and that reaction. And I had never noticed that, you know, how closely the phrases were. But, yeah. Okay, then we come to Joseph and Potiphar. And by the way, you know, it's been kind of hard. Didn't you find it hard to read about how lousy a father Isaac was? I mean, you know, it was neat that he loved Rebekah instantly and apparently only had the one wife his whole life and never took concubines, and that was great. But just the favoritism and then the seeds that were planted there and the example that was shown that it carries over to the next generation. And then you read about Jacob and all the terrible things he did. And then you read about his sons. And you almost get the feeling, can anything good come out of this family? Makes you think, can anything good come out of Nazareth? You know? And then you have Joseph, almost out of nowhere. Same environment, you know, same family, growing up with the same attitudes around him, and yet he's so different. So it's really refreshing that God can choose his people out of any environment. But anyway, Joseph and Potiphar. Potiphar's name meant the one whom Ra has given. We joke about men that think they're a gift from God, you know. Well, that's what his name meant. He's a gift from God, the sun god, Ra. His title, captain of the guard, means that he was the king's bodyguard. So he wasn't just some wealthy man. He was a very high up wealthy man, a person of influence and close to Pharaoh himself. Joseph's training under Potiphar was preparing him for his future role as the prime minister of all of Egypt. He learned Egyptian customs. He gained experience in successful business administration. All these things he was going to need in even greater amounts when he had huge responsibility put on him. He learned important lessons in those humiliating circumstances, but it made him a stronger leader later. I mean, he didn't know he was being prepared. He didn't know this is boot camp. And you're getting all the experience you're gonna need, or at least some of it. Okay, then you have Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Well, he's already tested by harsh circumstances. He's been sold by a slave, hated by his brothers, left for dead. But now he faced a relentless invitation to sin. I mean, it just didn't stop, because she didn't stop. His persistent resistance to her didn't deter her. It's like she's obsessed with him, stalking him, you know. But he was doing what Paul commands us to do: flee lust. He was having nothing to do with it. And that's wise. There's times when it's the wise thing to do, not the cowardly thing to do, to run. And that's what he was trying to do. So wisdom, not cowardice, leads discerning people to avoid volatile and tempting situations. It's like Jen Wilkins when she's saying, here's the line to sin. We don't just get, I'm still on this side of it, I'm okay. Nope, we do the Tarshish thing, except this is what God does say. This is one thing we are supposed to flee. And he demonstrated that. And then we have Potiphar's response. And I thought this was kind of interesting, the comments they made. He was furious. So the question is, why didn't he have Joseph put to death? I mean, here's a slave that has been charged with seducing or trying to seduce his wife. Slaves didn't survive that kind of thing, as a general rule. But because, he would have had him killed instantly, I think, if he really thought that Joseph did this. Instead, he had him thrown into prison, and not just any prison. He had him thrown into the prison where the king's prisoners were kept. Well, they were treated very well, because sometimes kings change their minds. In fact, we saw that later in the chapter. He did change his mind and restored. So you want to make sure, if you've got a prisoner from the king in your prison, you treat him well. Because if they're restored to favor and they carry stories, that guy really was a jerk, he really treated me badly in prison, then maybe you will be in trouble. So anyway, he puts Joseph in the king's section of the prison. And why was that? And possibly because he was skeptical about his wife's story. I have a suspicion this isn't the first time. And I have a suspicion that a lot of the servants knew a lot about her character. They weren't really buying the story. But what's happened? He couldn't disprove it. He wasn't there. And he can't publicly accept a slave's word over his wife's word. But she's made this very public. She's made all the other servants aware of it, probably yakking about it with her lady friends, out in the town. He's got to do something. He can't just pretend it never happened. And so I think he's not about to have Joseph killed, so he just has him put in prison, a good prison, which isn't great, but it was something he was sort of forced into. I thought, I think there's probably a lot of truth in that assessment.
It kind of makes you wonder too if his success had stopped at that time. Did everything within his household kind of go down the tubes?
Well, we're at the very least, Potiphar was living this easy life he hadn't had for a long time. He hadn't concerned himself with anything except the food, because Joseph was doing it all. Now all of a sudden it's back on him. And he probably never found another Joseph, one that efficient. So certainly his lifestyle changed, and maybe that was part of the reason he was mad too, because of the implications of losing this wonderful person. But at any rate, he didn't kill Joseph when he very well could have. He spared him. And then God and success. We talked, it says several times that God granted Joseph success. What does that mean? And I liked what they said to open this paragraph. The omnipresent God went to prison with Joseph. He didn't go alone. God went with him. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age, and even to prison. And God granted Joseph favor and success, both in Potiphar's house and again in prison. But remember, God's definition of success is not physical prosperity and easy living. God promises success to the person who delights himself in God and meditates on his law. And just think about Psalm 1. Blessed is the man that does not consort with sinners and take their advice, but he meditates day and night, and he will be successful in everything he does. Undoubtedly, Joseph learned much from the king's prisoners about the king's household. And this is something else he's going to need when he's second to Pharaoh. He needs to know not only how Egypt operates, but how the king's palace operates. Who do you go through? What are the channels? That kind of thing. What's the protocol? So suffering entrusted to God's higher purpose is not wasted. God can be trusted. And the presence of God graciously carries believers through even the longest and most painful suffering in life. And then they had some comments on suffering and faith. Temporary disappointments do not define your ultimate destiny. When people fail you, remember God cannot. How's your current suffering stripping you of every option but trusting God? Can you trust God even when the answers are few, pain is deep, solutions invisible? Psalm 27:14 says, wait for the Lord. Be strong, take heart, and wait. Because God is acting even when it's invisible to us. And God is not shocked by our faltering faith. Faith is not denying the hardship, but trusting God right in the middle of it. And then we have Joseph the leader. And until the moment that Pharaoh said, well, where can we find somebody better to take care of this problem, the coming problem, than this man who's, interpreted my dreams and whose God gives him wisdom. Until that moment, everybody around Joseph just saw him as a Hebrew slave. I mean, he was a good one, and he did his job right, but he's a slave. Now the idolatrous ruler of the most powerful kingdom on earth at that time recognized that his wisdom came from God Almighty, and God in his plan catapulted Joseph into leadership over all of Egypt. And he used those years of suffering to teach Joseph to depend on him and experience his presence. And it also created a sensitivity to suffering. When the baker and the cupbearer, I want to say candlestick baker. Anyway, they came in, and he says, why are your faces so sad? He instantly saw that, recognized that in them. So he's sensitive to other people that are suffering, and he has a desire to alleviate it. Tell me about it. Share it with me, And that's going to stand him in good stead. Think of all the suffering he alleviates in the years to come. Starving people with no hope, So God had greater plans in mind for Joseph than Joseph had in mind for himself. God developed a great leader in the dungeon, elevated him to the palace, and through him impacted his own family, Egypt, and eventually the entire world at that time. So I just thought those were all worth sharing from that. So with that, let's look at the homework. Days 4 and 5, and then next week we have the video, Jen's video. So we're on page 131. Yeah, a detour into weirdness with this thing with Judah and his daughter-in-law. Well, first of all, who did Judah marry when he left the family?
A Canaanite.
A Canaanite woman, I think of all things, And he had 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. And the eldest son married Tamar. And what happened to the eldest son?
He was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he was put to death.
He was put to death. We don't really know what happened to him, but it was something unusual enough, or there was something about the circumstances that people said God did it. It wasn't just like he died of a fever or fell off a cliff or something like that, but whatever it was, however the circumstances were, people just saw God caused it. And so then he has his second son marry the girl, and this was not a weird thing in those days because you needed an heir to carry on the father's name. And so if the oldest son died, the next one down was supposed to marry the widow, but his children would be counted as the first son's kids, so that the inheritance will still go through the firstborn. So even when you die, you don't lose your rights as the firstborn. Remember in the story of Ruth, when Ruth has her baby, they counted it as Naomi's, you know? So, yeah, so this was a common thing. Nobody would have thought it was strange. In fact, it was the expected thing. And there was reason for it. How did that practice, that custom, benefit the family?
Provided an heir.
It provided the heir. That's right. How did it benefit the widow?
She had a child.
She had a child.
And she was cared for.
She was cared for. She had a husband, again, who would take care of her, and even if he died, she now has a son who will care for her in her old age. So yes, so this is like her social security, having this child. So it actually was kind of a good custom. But why, so if that's a good custom, why didn't Onan want to have children with Tamar?
Well, wouldn't the inheritance go to the children from Tamar
Exactly.
instead of his children for his wife?
That's
for his
right.
wife?
I mean, Onan would still have received the ordinary inheritance, but the double share, the firstborn inheritance, would skip him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's just thinking, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
I'll make sure that doesn't happen. So he practiced his own birth control and to keep it from happening. And how did God respond to what he did?
Death.
Death. And again, people knew God did it, you know? So I think it's pretty obvious then why Judah was afraid to have his son Shelah. I mean, right now he's too young. I guess he's like the Joseph of the family, you know, there must be an age gap between him and the older two boys. But, so he tells Tamar, you just go and stay with your dad, and when my son gets old enough, then the marriage will take place. Well, years must have gone by because it was long enough that she saw that he has come of age and this hasn't happened, and so she takes matters into her own hands. Now it's very interesting. Does the narrator express condemnation for what she did?
I didn't notice that.
Yeah,
I
it's
was gonna say, I
conspicuous
didn't
by
think
its
so
absence, you know.
Well, she didn't do it out of lust.
Right,
No, she's doing it
out of desperation,
yeah,
I think. Yeah,
and to honor her deceased husband, to
Yeah.
carry on his seed, so
yeah.
sort of.
Yeah, so, because remember when Dinah was raped and Moses actually comments, and that thing shouldn't have been done.
Yeah.
You know, he makes that comment, but he says nothing about this. And she's also a Canaanite. In one sense, she doesn't know any better. You know, you think about Lot's daughters, you know, when the city's destroyed, they think, well, now how are we gonna get kids? There's nobody to marry. So I know, let's sleep with that. You know, and they weren't Canaanites, but they'd grown up in this evil surrounding, and that would have been a practical solution. You know, nobody would have thought anything about it. So in one sense, Tamar is doing what would be expected almost. Now, what is your evaluation of Judah's character after reading this story?
Well, I wasn't sure I liked him very much, but he does see the error of his way,
Yeah,
that she did what she did because he didn't do what he
He
was
should have
supposed
done.
to do.
Right. And I think, and that's good.
Mhm.
So yeah, you kind of hold your nose at the first part of it, but,
Well, the way it talked about he looked for a prostitute.
yeah, yeah,
That bothered me.
yeah. Both that he did it, because that's not the moral thing to do, and then the double standard. It's okay for me to go to a prostitute, but you acted like one, we're gonna kill you.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But anyway, God has his way of protecting his people, and the line to the Messiah. Did you see that Tamar is part of Christ's genealogy, and the son Perez, one of her twins?
Does it kind of make you wonder why the Lord chose Judah instead of Joseph, when Joseph seemed to be pretty righteous, through his life?
But see, does God ever choose people because of their worthiness?
That's true.
When did he select us for salvation? While we
Yet sinners.
while we were still rebellious. It's just like, I choose whom I will choose for my own purpose, and it's not anything, we want so much to earn it. We just can't, even though we know doctrine, but you just still feel that, it just seems so logical, But God did choose Joseph to rescue the whole family, and to put him in a place of honor, and to be a type of Christ. Judah was not a type of Christ, but Joseph was. We just see so many things that Joseph did. Jesus suffered much during his lifetime, but he never sinned. He always actively followed the Father's will. It's like, that was just Joseph's refrain. God could give interpretations, not me. How can I sin against God and do this? Always, he was mindful of God and acting on his principles. Just so many, and then showing compassion and forgiveness to his brothers, as Christ. We could just go on and on, the more you think about it. So in that sense, God did choose Joseph and raise him up and used him as an example. But he also chose Judah for his own reasons and his own purpose. And as you read through that genealogy, you find all kinds of interesting, unexpected people in it. And even Tamar, she becomes part of the line. She's a Canaanite. But God wants people from every nation and every culture and every language and tongue. He wants some of those people to be in heaven. He will bless their cultures and use it. All right, so we've already talked about, if we look down at, we skipped over one. How about 18? Why did the midwife put a scarlet thread around the hand of the baby she thinks is going to be delivered first?
So she would know.
Yeah, so she'll know this is the first one, because it's important. Even though it's just minutes apart, in the case of twins, it's important to know who popped out first, So she ties the scarlet cord, and then just like, I guess Judah wasn't born first, but he came out grasping the heel, and this little baby pulled his fist back, and out pops little Perez, Why does Joseph find favor with Potiphar? Well, we've actually talked about that, because it was obvious God was blessing him and giving him success. And I think we already know why Potiphar's wife is coming after him. He's very handsome, very good looking. And we know why he refused her advances. It's a sin against God. But what do question 23, what do those two verses tell you about the intensity of her advances?
She's basically sexually harassing him.
Yeah.
To the point where finally she grabs his clothes.
Right.
So,
Well, and she schemes to have him.
Oh yeah, she schemes.
Oh.
She's persistent. She's relentless. She's bold. She is bold, just and of course he ends up in prison as a result of his being accused. But what pattern recurs at the end of chapter 39?
The Lord is with Joseph, and
And you
he
see almost the
prospers.
same
Yeah.
phrases being used in both Potiphar's house and in prison. The Lord was with him, the Lord blessed him, the Lord gave him success, other people noticed it, and he was given more and more and more responsibility. Okay, so that brings us to day 5. So we have the cupbearer and the baker. And in what way is Joseph able to assist him? Now this is before the dreams. How is he assisting them before the dreams? He's described as, there's a phrase that they use in,
That he has compassion for them.
he has compassion. He's described as their personal attendant. And I thought that was kind of interesting. Makes me think of a ballet. Did you watch the Downton Abbey series?
Yes.
Are you familiar with that? Okay, well, it's a story of this very wealthy family in England. They have this house that looks like a castle. But you see, it's like upstairs, downstairs. You're not just following the lives of the rich people, but also of all the servants. Well, the guy that's the husband's attendant and the woman that's his wife's maid, they are very high status. Even though they eat with the other servants downstairs in the kitchen, they sit at the head of that table. I think the very head was the chief butler,
Yes.
Mr. Bates,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But they are high ranking. They're not the little scrub person, you know. They're not the kitchen assistant. So he is assigned to be the personal attendant. Remember I said that king's prisoners are treated well for good reason. You want to make sure you take care of them just in case, you know. And so the warden thought, I can't think of anybody better to attend these two men than Joseph. So Joseph is kind of made their valet or whatever. I don't know what all was involved. But anyway, it brought him into close proximity with him, which God was going to use for his purpose. And so close that when they come in one day looking sad, he notices it, that they look different. And what does his statement in chapter 40, verse 8 indicate about his character? They tell him, we have these dreams and we don't know what they mean. There's nobody to help us.
The interpretations belong to God, not man.
Okay, so he says that, but what does that tell you about him?
Everything comes from God.
Everything comes from God. He's not claiming any credit for himself. It's not like, I could probably help you with that, you know? No, he says, look, interpretations come from God, so tell me, share them with me, and maybe I can help you, but, you know, because of God. So he's humble, and he's also confident. He doesn't have any doubt that God can give a solution to this. And he kind of shares that to give him hope, I guess. And does he accurately interpret the dreams? Of course, because God tells him exactly. And so what he says is going to happen does come to happen. So, unfortunately, the cupbearer kind of forgets to mention this. Why do you think that was? We're not told, so this is, why do you think that he forgot?
Possibly for the timing for Pharaoh's dream,
Okay.
or the king's dream.
Okay, so God was going to remind him, okay. Certainly God had a purpose for it. But humanly speaking, why do you think the
He was thinking only of himself. Oh, look, I'm getting out of prison. I get to go back to work for
It could
Pharaoh.
be that, okay. I thought of a couple things. Remember he was let out on Pharaoh's birthday? Well, if it's a birthday, probably there's a big party. If he's the cupbearer again, all of a sudden he has a big party to manage and taste the wine, do whatever. He was very busy suddenly,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and probably just in all the, you know, he's gotta think about what Pharaoh wants and do it, you know. And he probably just forgot about it at the time, and then the longer you go on, the harder it is to bring up. And I thought maybe too, he didn't wanna rock the boat. You know, he didn't wanna come out and say, now Pharaoh, remember when you sent me to prison? Because obviously he had done something to offend Pharaoh, or he wouldn't have been sent to prison. Maybe he didn't want to bring that little detail and maybe get in trouble again, you know. We don't know, but it could, you know, all of those things could have happened. But for whatever reason, on his part, he forgot. God was going to use it then when Pharaoh had his dreams. Okay, question 31. How long did you estimate that Joseph has been in prison at this point?
2 years.
Well, 2 years since the cupbearer was released and the baker executed, but he was in prison before that, and we're not told the number of years, so that's why we're estimating.
I guessed at 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know for sure, but I'm thinking, it says after some time, and just the way it says it, it makes you think after a long time, years, you know. Because I thought, you know, he had to have been in prison for a while for the warden to be able to observe him and to see that God was blessing him. That didn't just happen in a day. So there had to be enough time for him to observe. And then Joseph was doing all these things before the baker and the cupbearer were put in prison. So he's doing, the warden has put everything under his power. So that went on. And then they were tossed into prison and he became their personal assistant. So you get the idea, it's several years that he was in prison. Why do you think that at the top of the next page, why do you think God allowed that? Why have him sit there for so long, unjustly? He hadn't done anything wrong, in fact, everything right. And yet here he is.
Well, as we talked about before, and he had to prepare Joseph for what was to come.
He was preparing him not only the knowledge of the responsibilities that he would need, but I think he's building his character, that he's showing, even though it's hard, he's showing himself faithful to Joseph, and that Joseph can depend on him. And that will stand him in good stead when all of a sudden he not only has to run the country, he has to prepare for famine that he knows is coming. And how do you do that? So certainly God was developing him. And then in 33, did you get kind of tired of answering this? Who gave Pharaoh his dreams? God. Who gave the interpretation? God. Who will fulfill the dreams? God. God is always the hero. Yes.
Right.
And I thought it was interesting, Jen's comment that in Egypt, Pharaoh was considered to be a god. But he's not able to interpret his own dream. And so he learns that Joseph's God is bigger than him. In fact, everybody learns that Joseph's God is more powerful than this little God. And yet, Pharaoh is not angry about that. It says he's pleased. And he immediately appoints, Joseph to this position of great honor and power. Now, how long has it been since Joseph was sold into slavery?
13 years.
13 years. So he was in prison for all that time, except for however time he was in Potiphar's house. So possibly half of the time, or 3/4 of the time he was in prison, And then he has 2 sons of his own. By the way, he never went back to being anything less than this high elevated person. Pharaoh gave him a wife of very high standing, the daughter of the high priest. Well, you can't get much higher than that. And he never had any other wife, and he had 2 sons. Manasseh, what does Manasseh mean? It has to do with forgetting. And it
God
says,
made me forget my hardship and father's house.
I don't think he means literally forget it, you know, because
No.
obviously he remembered it. But it's not ruling my life. It's not controlling my life. I am able to be happy and content here. He's made me forget that in that sense. And then he names Ephraim, which means fruitful. And God has made me fruitful where?
In the land of my affliction.
In this land of my affliction.
Right.
He's had a hard life. Back home, it was his father's house, but he had hardship. But God has brought me through that and made me forget it. It's not ruling me and controlling me. And now he's made me fruitful in my land of affliction, my present land where I was a slave and imprisoned. You know, God has brought me through it all and above it all and made me fruitful to boot. So that tells you he's grateful for God, you know. It's not that he doesn't feel the pain, but he's grateful for God, for what God has done for him. And then I thought, question 37, how do you think Joseph felt to be in a position to provide for so many people?
Well, humbled for one thing.
Humble.
Honored, grateful to God for all of that.
Now think about it in light of the fact that he has suffered a lot. What is this position allowing him to do?
To care for his
To care for other people who are suffering. You know, and I think he must have been glad about that. Corinthians, God has comforted us in all of our afflictions so that we will be able to comfort others. I think God was building that part of his character as well as the administrative abilities. There were just so many things that God was building into Joseph. And I think this compassionate care for needy people. And he was going to see a steady stream of them in the years to come, including his own family. And that was going to be the route to restoration with his family. Okay, and the last thing they asked, and I don't usually ask you to share the application, but these I think we can share. We see so many things in Joseph to admire. What are 3 things or some things that you would like, and you would like to become more like him? Yeah.
My 3 were forgiving, perseverant,
Mm-hmm.
and obedient to God.
Okay, yeah, those are all such good things. I had down the ability to see God's hand in the circumstances. You know, sometimes when bad things happen or something, I think, oh, you know, why did this happen to me? But he was able to see God's hand and just quietly knew that God had a purpose. And he kind of rested in that. Honoring God and believing that he can do impossible things.
He was also compassionate.
Yes, very much so. Why are you so downcast? Tell me about it. Yeah. All right, so that brings us to the end of the homework. So for next week, we'll take a look at Micah, or maybe it should be called Micah, I don't know, since we found out that Dinah is Dina. But anyway, we'll do that and figure out where he falls on the timeline and where he fits on the map. And we will listen to the video. Thank you.